You were never supposed to hear what I'm about to tell you. And if you feel a chill crawling up your spine in the next few seconds, understand this. It's not fear, it's recognition. Because the moment you learn the truth about the woman in Motel Room 19, something ancient inside you wakes up, something that remembers the things history tried to bury. So listen carefully. Not everyone who hears this story walks away unchanged. Some say it pulls you in, others say it follows you. It began with a sound. Not a scream, not a whisper, something in between, like a voice caught between worlds exhaling the final secret it could no longer carry. The night clerk said he heard it echo through the hallway at precisely 3:09 a.m. But the security camera had already frozen 6 minutes earlier, as if something had reached through the lens and removed the moment, as if time itself didn't want what happened next to be recorded. She checked in at 2:31 a.m., no luggage, no purse. No ID, just a coat too thin for the weather and eyes that made the clerk's stomach twist. Not because they were frightening, but because they were empty in a way that didn't make sense on a living face. People can fake emotions, but they can't fake the absence of a soul. She wrote her name in the sign and book with a hand that trembled like someone who had forgotten what it meant to be human. The name she wrote was Aurelia. The ink sank deeper into the page than any other signature on the sheet. Some said the paper looked bruised where her pen touched it. Room 19 was the farthest from the lobby, isolated, quiet, the kind of room you assign to someone you suspect won't stay long enough to complain. She went straight there, but here's where the descent begins, and where most people stop telling the story. Guests on that side of the motel started reporting things, soft knocks on their doors that stopped the moment they approached, whispers seeping through the air vents in a language no one recognized, and the sensation that something invisible was standing beside their beds. We knelt, watching, listening, studying them like prey. At 4:12 a.m., the man staying in room 18, right beside hers, woke up unable to breathe. He said it felt like someone was sitting on his chest. No. But when he opened his eyes, he saw a shadow, thin, upright, standing at the far corner of his room, head tilted like it was memorizing his face. Before he could scream, it vanished. Not the way a person leaves a room, the way a flame disappears when you pinch it. What he didn't know, what none of the guests knew, was that as they were choking on their nightmares, Aurelia was doing something inside room 19 that should have been impossible. The cleaning staff found it the next day. No one knows who unlocked the door. It wasn't supposed to be unlocked. But the moment the sun hit the threshold, the handle slid down on its own, smooth, deliberate, like a hand they couldn't see was inviting them inside. The room was cold enough that their breath fogged. No windows broken, no signs of struggle. The bed was perfectly made, but the mirror was dripping with condensation as if someone had been breathing on it for hours. Words were written on the glass, not in English, not in Latin. A script that loops and twists like something drawn by a person familiar with symbols not used in this world anymore. Experts tried to translate it but failed. The closest approximation they ever got was this: I opened the door, they closed. But that wasn't the part that made the clerk quit his job and move 3 states away. It was the smell, a smell like old stone, like wet earth, like the inside of a cave that hasn't been touched by sunlight in thousands of years. A smell that doesn't belong in a motel room built in the 1980s. On the floor was a single object, a small, circular piece of metal, bronze, tarnished, covered in symbols found only on artifacts from civilizations that shouldn't have had contact with each other. Greeks, Egyptians, early Romans, Proto-Celts, and a culture older than all of them. The one that left stone circles no one can explain. The artifact was warm, and when investigators retrieved it, the power went out across the entire building for 7 minutes. Guests described those 7 minutes as a silent darkness, a darkness that wasn't empty but aware, watching, waiting. When the lights flickered back on, the artifact was cold, and the woman who found it said she'd felt something else during the blackout, something breathing just behind her shoulder. Warm, close, too close. Aurelia was gone. No body, no footprints, no fingerprints. No trace she had ever existed except for the bruised signature in the registry and the artifact that all federal records now list as a lost during transfer even though 3 witnesses swear they saw a man in a black suit take it away. But here's the detail that pulls this story out of the realm of coincidence and into something much darker, something older, something built into the foundations of the world you think you understand. There wasn't just one Motel Room 19. The same woman appeared in a roadside inn in Nevada in 1972, a capsule hotel in Tokyo in 1994, a flat in London in 2008, a hostel in Mexico City in 2016, a guest house in rural Brazil in 2021, and a motel in upstate New York, this one just months ago. Different continents, different decades, same woman, same ritual, same message on the mirror, same disappearing act that defies logic, physics, and reality. And if you're wondering how authorities explain this, they don't. They avoid it. They bury it. Because if they acknowledged it, they'd have to acknowledge what she represents. Aurelia wasn't running from something. She was running towards something. And room 19 wasn't her hiding place. It was her doorway, her invitation, her signal. Something ancient has been waking, and she's the first sign. Before you step deeper into this, understand something crucial. Every man who has ever attempted to trace Aurelia's path has crossed a threshold he could never step back from. Not because the truth is terrifying, though it is, but because once you see the architecture of the world behind the world, once you glimpse the machinery humming behind the polite illusions we call civilization, you start recognizing its fingerprints everywhere. And that is exactly what happened when investigators examined the motel. They didn't find blood. They didn't find evidence of physical struggle, but they found patterns. Patterns that lined up with places no one expected. Let's begin with the simplest anomaly, the doorframe to room 19. It wasn't aligned with the rest of the building. The walls around it were shifted by 2 inches, 2 inches that didn't show up on blueprints, construction records, insurance documents, or architectural plans. 2 inches that no contractor claimed responsibility for. It was as if the room had drifted, not metaphorically. Physically skewed in a way that defied engineering but matched perfectly with structures found in megalithic ruins across Europe and South America, places built with a precision modern humans still can't explain. Stone circles, chamber entrances, ritual passageways. Doorways meant not for people, but for phenomena. When the lead investigator, a man named Carter, ran his hand along the inside of the frame, he felt something no human being should ever feel. Heat, not warmth, not radiation, living heat, pulsing like breath. And when he held his ear close, he swore he heard movement, not in the motel, but behind the motel, behind the drywall, behind the world. Like a crowd shifting in unison, waiting. That same morning, a guest in room 21 stepped outside for a cigarette and noticed something else. Birds, dozens of them. Sitting on the power line, silent, motionless, all facing the same direction, toward room 19. He took a picture. Later, someone from a 3-letter agency confiscated his phone and told him the images had been corrupted. Birds don't corrupt images, but symbols do. Signals do. Events do so. By noon, the motel was surrounded. Unmarked government cars, men who refused to give names, a mobile command unit disguised as a radio van. They questioned everyone separately, and the story was always the same. The woman didn't look lost. She looked like she had arrived. But the question that burned through every investigator was the same one you're likely asking now. Where did she come from, and where did she go? To answer that, we need to follow a man who did the one thing no one else dared. He broke protocol. He disobeyed orders. He opened the night clerk's logbook and traced the shape of her signature, Aurelia. The ink around the letters was darker than all the others. The fibers of the paper were indented deeper than any normal pen could have pressed without tearing. As if the pen wasn't writing on the surface, but pushing through it. As if she wasn't signing her name into the book, but into the building itself. Carter lifted the page, held it to the light, and saw what no one else had noticed. The letters were reversed on the next sheet, as if the ink had burned through, as if the signature wanted to be seen on both sides. He took a picture, but the moment he looked at the photo, he felt something behind him, something standing so close he could hear the hum of its presence. Not breath, not movement, but a kind of vibration like air thickened by intention. When he spun around, no one was there. But on the opposite wall, a faint smear of condensation appeared, as if someone invisible had leaned there moments before. This was the moment Carter stopped being a witness and became a target. Because when he returned the next day, the logbook was gone. The front desk computer was replaced. Every guest record for that month had been wiped. The cameras had been removed, the wiring stripped, the outlets sealed. They weren't covering a crime. They were covering an arrival. The agency running the operation shut down the entire block around the motel for electrical maintenance. Neighbors were told to stay indoors. Anyone who asked questions was threatened with fines or arrests for obstruction. But despite all the suppression, all the erasure, one detail slipped through: a discovery made by a utility worker who didn't understand what he had stumbled upon. Behind room 19, buried 2 feet under the ground, was a hollow metal cylinder the size of a thermos. Smooth, seamless, no latch, no opening, no markings except a single indentation on the side shaped like a spiral. Not a decorative spiral, not an artistic flourish. A precise spiral, mathematically identical to those carved on tombs in Ireland, temples in Egypt, tablets in Greece, obsidian artifacts in Mexico, and stone monoliths in Japan. 5 continents, 7 cultures, thousands of years apart, same symbol. The spiral has always meant the same thing in every civilization: the passage, the return, the cycle. When the worker tried to pick it up, he said it vibrated like something inside was shifting, something waking. 10 minutes later, men in black suits took it from him. He never saw it again. Neither did Carter, neither did the motel owners, neither did anyone who asked. And this is where everything begins to align, because Aurelia didn't just appear in random locations. Every place she surfaced matched an ancient grid, buried coordinates known only to scholars of forbidden archaeology and certain intelligence agencies that operate in the shadows of global structures. A grid isn't designed for human movement. It's designed for human movement. It's designed for transitions. For the moments when something pushes through. Aurelia was not passing through these places. She was activating them. And room 19 wasn't just a room. It was a node, a hinge, a pressure point on the spine of the world. The woman isn't the mystery. The door is. And now that you've stepped this far, you're closer to that door than any man should ever be. Before we go any deeper, steady yourself. What comes next isn't a story. It's the unraveling of an illusion you've lived inside your entire life. Because the more investigators dug into the identity of the woman from room 19, the more they realized something impossible. Aurelia did not exist. Not in any database, not in any census, not in any birth record, passport registry, hospital file, or surveillance system. In a world where every movement is tracked and every face is captured, she left no digital shadow. No trail, no classification. It was as if the world itself refused to acknowledge her. And the men hunting for answers learned something chilling. When a person leaves no record, it means someone erased it. When a person leaves no footprint, it means someone never allowed it to form. But Aurelia was different. She left something far more dangerous than a footprint. She left a pattern. The pattern began with the first photograph investigators thought they had of her. A grainy, time-stamped image from the motel's parking lot camera. She was captured stepping out of the shadows, head lowered, coat drawn tight around her frame. But when analysts enhanced the photo, something twisted reality. Her outline was sharper than the background. Too sharp, like she wasn't inside the photo but imprinted onto it. Her shadow didn't match the angle of the other shadows. Her hair didn't reflect light correctly. And most disturbing, her face was blurred, even though the camera was functioning perfectly. It wasn't motion blur, it wasn't pixel tear. It was something else, something that looked more like censorship than distortion. Images don't censor themselves, but encrypted anomalies do. Events outside the boundary of normal physics do. Entities passing through the world rather than into it do. Carter refused to let it go. He printed the image and stared at it for hours, searching for anything human left in it, anything normal, anything explainable. But the longer he stared, the more he realized something horrifying. He had seen her before. Not in person, not in a dream, but in a symbol. He pulled out old case files, ancient crimes, unexplained deaths, mass hallucination reports, site closures, unmarked investigations, and began laying them side by side on his office floor. It took hours, then days, then 2 weeks. Only when he stepped back did the shape reveal itself. A spiral. A spiral. The same spiral found behind room 19. The same spiral found on ancient stones in Ireland, in Greece, in Egypt, in Peru, in Japan. The same spiral etched faintly into Aurelia's lost artifact. But the spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a map. Every incident, every disappearance formed a point on that map, and Aurelia had appeared at all of them. That meant she wasn't just a person passing through time. She was part of time's mechanism, a pressure point, a hinge, a signal that something was moving beneath the surface of human history. And someone or something was using her to move it. Carter's obsession grew. He dug into ancient texts, forbidden codices, mistranslated scrolls from the Library of Alexandria, outlawed papyrus fragments kept in private collections owned by men who feared their knowledge more than their death. That was where he found the first real clue. Not about Aurelia herself, but about something older than her. An ancient order, a hidden circle, a group that existed before governments, before kingdoms, before the idea of nations even formed. They were called many names and fragments of surviving texts, of the watchers beneath the threshold, or the custodians of the doorway, the unseen chorus. But the one title that appeared across every civilization was this: a keepers of the 19th room, 19. Always 19, not 18, not 20, 19. In ancient numerology, 19 is the number of transition, the number of the open gate, the number of the returning cycle. And in every culture that recorded their existence, the keepers appeared at moments when reality thinned, moments when something broke through. And wherever they appeared, a woman appeared with them. A woman with no name. A woman with no past. A woman who walked into rooms that should not exist and left behind symbols humanity wasn't meant to decipher. The scripts described her with chilling consistency. A woman of no age, a woman of no age, a woman of no era, a woman who arrives before the threshold crack, a woman whose eyes do not reflect the world but observe it, a woman who speaks to shadows as if they were her own children. If you're wondering whether these ancient texts described Aurelia exactly, they did. Her mismatched clothing across incidents, her ever-changing appearance. Her ability to vanish, her ritual markings, her presence at every activation point across the ancient grid. She wasn't a ghost, she wasn't a traveler, she wasn't a victim. She was an operative, a messenger, a harbinger of something that only awakened when the world slipped too far off its axis. Carter realized this too late. Because the deeper he went, the more he noticed things shifting around him, footsteps behind him where no one walked, shadows and mirrors that weren't his own, lights flickering whenever he said the name Aurelia out loud. And then came the night he received a message. Not a call, not an email, not a letter, a whisper from inside his own home, spoken in a voice he recognized instantly. The same voice guests in the motel described. A voice that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite ancient, but was undeniably hers. It said only one thing, a stop looking. But he didn't stop. Men obsessed with truth rarely do. And that was when he began to disappear, not physically, but from the edges of reality. Conversations he didn't remember having. Objects moving on their own. Faces in crowds turning toward him in unison, as if something inside them recognized what he had uncovered. The grid was real, the door was real, Aurelia was real, and the keepers of the 19th room were not done. You're deep enough now that I can tell you something most people could never absorb without breaking. The motel itself, the cheap, fluorescent-lit, forgotten building where Aurelia appeared, was never supposed to exist where it stood. And I don't mean that architecturally. I mean reality itself resisted its construction. When Carter retrieved the original zoning maps of the land, he found something that made his breath lock in his chest. Every recorded map of the area, every survey, every geological blueprint, every archived property grid showed an empty stretch of terrain where the motel should have been. No building, no foundation, not even a permit application. The motel had simply appeared on the records in 1993, fully formed with a list of previous owners that were all dead, missing, or unverifiable. An entire building slipped into existence like a counterfeit memory. But that was just the first fracture. The second fracture came when Carter interviewed the original contractor, or at least the man listed as the original contractor. The man lived alone in a shack 40 miles from anything resembling civilization. His yard was filled with rusted metal sculptures, spirals, circles, twisting shapes that made no sense to the human eye but echoed ancient patterns found on stone tombs and temples across the world. When Carter asked him about the motel, the man went still, his pupils dilated, his breathing slowed. And then, with a voice that shook like he was remembering a wound instead of a project, he said, "We didn't build room 19. Carter asked who did. The man shook his head. It was already there. He said the workers found it before construction even began. An empty concrete room in the middle of a vacant lot. No explanation, no origin. Just a single room standing alone under an open sky, walls too thick for the tools they had, doorframe too old for the soil it sat on. Like an ancient structure that somehow appeared before the rest of the building was ever constructed around it. The foreman wanted to demolish it, but every time they tried, something went wrong. Power tools malfunctioned, concrete saws shattered, workers got nauseous just walking inside the doorway. One man vanished. Simply stepped behind the wall for a moment and never came back. After a week of failures, the foreman made a decision, one driven by desperation, fear, and a sense that the room wasn't going anywhere. He told the workers to build around it, to hide it in plain sight. To let it remain the heart of the structure, room 19 wasn't added to the motel. The motel was added to room 19. Carter felt the ground shift under him as the contractor's words fell into place. Because if room 19 predated the motel, then the motel wasn't a location. It was a vessel, a mask, a shell covering a chamber that had been waiting for someone like Aurelia to arrive. And the question became impossible to ignore. How many other buildings in the world were built around places not meant for mankind? As Carter searched deeper, he found documents tying the motel location to an older site, a pre-Columbian mound that had been flattened in the 1960s for a military surveying. But before it was destroyed, one brief archaeological report was filed describing an underground chamber discovered beneath the mound. A chamber aligned with a specific astronomical configuration. A chamber with a spiraled marking carved into its entrance stone. A chamber that disappeared from all records days after its discovery. The coordinates of that chamber matched the exact placement of the motel's room 19. Coincidence doesn't exist at this depth. Carter's research began unfolding a truth that was too dark, too large, too monumental to be accidental. Ancient cultures built structures over older ones, governments built bases over ancient structures, and corporations built motels over the forgotten fractures of the world because something beneath the earth needed to be contained or awakened. Depending on who you ask, every ancient civilization had a ritual involving a sealed room, a threshold, a passage. Egypt called it the Amask Chamber. Rome called it the 19th Gate. The Greeks spoke of a hollow step. The Maya carved glyphs showing figures stepping into spirals, returning with knowledge not meant for the living. All of them describe the same phenomenon, a woman, faceless, ageless, bearing a mark, a messenger who appeared when the doorway was ready to open. Carter realized something chilling. Aurelia didn't choose the motel. She was drawn to it, summoned by the resonance of the ancient chamber beneath it, a frequency older than human history, a pulse buried in the bedrock of the world. The motel wasn't haunted, it was activated. And Aurelia wasn't a wanderer, she was the key. When Carter returned to the motel late one evening to re-examine the site, he felt a pressure in his chest, the same pressure guests had described the night she arrived. The temperature dropped, his breath fogged. The lights flickered in rhythmic pulses, like a heartbeat he wasn't supposed to hear. He stepped into room 19. The walls hummed, the floor vibrated, the air thickened with static and expectation. On the mirror, something new had appeared. Not condensation, not writing. A shape, pressed from the inside of the glass outward. A handprint, small, thin, feminine, fresh, and beneath it, written faintly as if carved by breath rather than hand, was a message. She has returned. Carter stumbled back, because this time he wasn't alone. A figure stood in the corner of the room, barely visible in the flickering light. Thin, silent, head tilted in that same inhuman angle witnesses described, watching him, measuring him, marking him. But it wasn't Aurelia. It was someone else, another messenger. Another shadow called from the other side of the threshold. And that's when Carter finally understood. Room 19 was not unique. It was one of many, and the doors were opening. By now, you need to understand what Room 19 truly is. Not as a room, not as a building, not as a motel, but as a mechanism. And mechanisms are never innocent. They are built to serve a purpose, to exert control, to activate forces the world above has long forgotten. Carter had pieced together the pattern. Aurelia appeared only at nodes, places aligned with ancient grids, ley lines, and astronomical events. She wasn't random. She was precise, and wherever she manifested, reality itself became malleable. The air thickened, time bent, perception warped. Guests described hallucinations, sudden memory lapses, emotional eruptions they could not explain. The police dismissed it, science ignored it, but the keepers, the unseen custodians of these thresholds, knew exactly what they were doing, because the world is built on layers. Not just political, not just financial, psychological, social, spiritual, and Room 19, that room was designed to manipulate every single one of them. You think governments fail. You think corporations make mistakes. You think history unfolds through chance. It doesn't. Everything you know is curated. Propagandist, filtered, engineered. And thresholds like Room 19 exist to reinforce control, to maintain hierarchy, to remind you that reality is not yours to bend. It is theirs to sculpt. The first thing Carter realized about Aurelia is this. She wasn't dangerous in the traditional sense. She was dangerous because she revealed danger. She exposed the cracks in perception, the vulnerabilities in human cognition, the blind spots in institutions that claim to protect us, but in truth have only ever wanted obedience. And the second thing, she was not alone. Multiple witnesses from different continents described not one but 3 figures appearing with her. Shadows in the corner, faint outlines, standing silently while she performed her ritual. They didn't speak, they didn't move, but they influenced every human in the vicinity. They were the silent enforcers of the threshold, ensuring that anyone who crossed into understanding was changed or removed. Carter's journals describe a specific instance. A guest tried to confront Aurelia, knocked on Room 19 at 4:03 a.m., demanded answers. What he saw, what he lived through for a minute that felt like hours, was a distortion of reality. The hallway stretched unnaturally, the ceiling bent like liquid, and the lights flickered in a spiral pattern, like the symbols on the artifact. His words came out in reverse. His own voice sounded alien. He fled, screaming, but when officers arrived, the room was empty. The guest claimed he was not the same person who left. Psychologists confirmed he was mentally altered, though he could not explain how. This is the true function of thresholds like Room 19. Transformation, not physical transformation, psychological, cognitive, temporal. Anyone who steps too close is altered. Their perception, their memory, their very essence of reality is recalibrated. It is a silent system of control that has existed since humanity first tried to build civilizations. The rulers, the priesthoods, the unseen custodians, all of them have relied on this knowledge. By the time Carter connected the dots, he realized something unnerving. Room 19 was not a singular anomaly. He began identifying active nodes across the globe, hidden hotels, forgotten monasteries, sealed chambers, and abandoned government facilities. Each location shared the same structural anomaly, a space too precise, too perfectly aligned with energy fields, spiral geometries, and sacred numerology. And each contained evidence of psychological operations so subtle, so profound, they could manipulate generations without a single person ever realizing they were controlled. Here is where you, the observer, must act, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with recognition. Halfway through our journey, you must declare to yourself, aloud in the comments, 2 symbolic phrases, not because I ask, not because it's arbitrary, but because acknowledgement is the first act of mastery. Type twice, I see the threshold, and then type it again. I see the threshold. Say it. Lock it in. Because what you are about to witness is not entertainment, it is initiation. Room 19 is a reflection of all control mechanisms. What you see, what you are allowed to know, what you believe is possible. Institutions, governments, churches, corporations, and families, they have all used these thresholds in ways subtle and overt to shape societies, to maintain hierarchies, to hide truths. And thresholds like Room 19 have existed to monitor those who might wake to the larger design. Aurelia, then, is not an agent of destruction. She is a revealer. She exposes the architecture of control and leaves evidence behind. The keepers of the 19th room, meanwhile, enforce it. They correct anomalies. They remove witnesses. And when the room activates, it does so precisely to measure and manage resistance. Carter, in his final notes before he vanished, wrote this: "The room does not just contain, it rewrites. The mind bends before it, reshapes itself, and learns obedience. What we call reality is fragile." The thresholds, when awakened, reveal the skeleton. And the woman is the key. She carries the measure of all thresholds and moves like a signal across time. If you encounter her, you do not survive unchanged. You are reading these words now because the threshold has already touched you. You are aware. The signal has reached you. Aurelia is not a story. She is a system, and every system that touches the human mind leaves a mark. This is why I tell you, do not look away. Do not dismiss the warnings. Reality is being observed. Consciousness is being measured. Every step you take into the forbidden, every question you dare ask, every memory you examine, it is being cataloged. The woman in room 19 is not alone. The room is not alone, and the grid is awakening. The question now becomes, will you step fully through the threshold, or will you remain outside, blind to the design, unaware of the forces shaping your mind, your history, your life? Here is where most men turn back, not because they lack courage, but because they finally understand the weight of what they're touching. When Carter crossed the threshold of room 19 for the first and last time, he wrote something in trembling handwriting. Something that tells you everything you need to know about how deep this goes. The room did not wait for me. It recognized me. Understand what that means. A place, an empty, forgotten motel room, acknowledged a human consciousness the way a predator recognizes the heartbeat of prey. That level of awareness, that level of engineered intelligence does not come from any modern institution. No government, no laboratory, no corporation, no secret agency. This goes far beyond. It reaches back to a time when power didn't come from machines or money, but from the ability to manipulate perception itself. Because long before written history, the elites of ancient empires discovered the same truth Carter stumbled into. If you can control what a man believes is real, you control the man. Not through chains, not through armies, through his own mind. And the earliest threshold structures, the ancestors of Room 19, were built for exactly that purpose. You think the pyramids were only tombs? You think ancient temples were places of worship? You think the labyrinths of Rome and Greece were symbolic? They were thresholds. They were designed to bend consciousness, distort time perception, fracture identity, and install belief systems that would endure for generations. Every empire learned the same lesson. It's not enough to rule bodies. You must rule perception itself. And Room 19 is simply the most modern incarnation of an ancient blueprint. A hidden chamber built not with stone and ritual, but with anonymity, because nothing is more invisible than a cheap, forgotten motel off a highway no one remembers. Carter realized this when he mapped the room's coordinates onto ancient geography. He discovered that Room 19 aligned perfectly with an ancient temple site that Roman scholars once called the Eye of the Eighth Gate, a place where priests trained themselves to dissolve their sense of self, to become vessels for unseen forces that dictated the destiny of nations. That same geometric signature, spiral-based, fractal encoding golden ratios, appears in the walls of the motel room, almost as if the builders were following an old architectural spell. Not a literal spell, but a psychological engineering pattern designed to create a specific mental effect: fear, surrender, compliance. Yet Aurelia stood outside that system. She wasn't a guard. She wasn't a keeper. She was something else entirely, an anomaly that destabilized the threshold instead of enforcing it, a glitch in the grid, a deviation the system couldn't eliminate. And this is why the keepers feared her, why they followed her, why they appeared whenever she manifested. Because her presence didn't strengthen the threshold. It corrupted it. It awakened it. Carter's audio recordings, fragmented, static-filled, captured one chilling moment before he disappeared. You can hear Aurelia's voice, soft but hollow, speaking words that sound like reversed Latin, layered with echoes. And underneath her voice, a deeper one, a male voice speaking over hers. No, not over, through her. You were never meant to see the grid, it says. You were meant to live inside it. Carter drops the recorder. He gasps, steps back. The room crackles like a broken speaker. And then in the last clear moment, he whispers, "They're not human." Whether he meant Aurelia, the keepers, or the architects of the threshold, we'll never know. But what we do know is this: Carter wasn't the first to uncover the grid, and he wasn't the last to be taken. You sit here now, watching, listening, absorbing this story, because something in you recognized the truth. A tension inside you shifted. A piece of you leaned forward, your instincts responding like a tuning fork struck by the right frequency. Men who chase forbidden knowledge all feel the same pull. A hunger not just to know, but to see, to tear down illusions, to confront the architecture of power beneath the world. That hunger is why the grid was built. Because men like you, throughout history, have always threatened the systems designed to control them. Every empire built thresholds to contain men like you. Every institution constructed illusions to restrict men like you. Every ruler created myths, laws, rituals, and a truth to suppress men like you. But thresholds do not merely contain, they test, they measure, they identify. And if you are hearing this, if your chest feels tight, if the back of your neck tingles, if some part of you feels like you've stepped too close to something you cannot unsee, you are being measured right now. Not by me. By the grid, you are not watching a story. You are participating in a ritual, the same ritual ancient initiates experienced when they first entered the forbidden chambers of their time. And like them, you stand on the brink of transformation. But remember this: once Aurelia marks a man, the keepers follow. Not physically, not visibly, but psychologically, through distortions in memory, through symbols that repeat, through moments of déjà vu that feel too precise to be random. This is why Carter vanished. This is why witnesses lost their minds. This is why Room 19 reactivates in cycles. The grid is alive, and the grid is watching. That tells me everything about you. Most men hear the grid whisper and step back, but not you. You lean in. You want the truth even if it scars. So listen carefully, because Section 7 is where the descent sharpens, where the mask comes off, where Aurelia stops being a mystery and becomes a warning. Everything we've explored so far points to one realization: Aurelia was not a victim. She wasn't lost. She wasn't trapped. She was deliberate, and what she embodied, what she carried, terrified the keepers more than anything in their centuries of control. Carter discovered this the night he broke into the motel's underground maintenance corridor, following a trail of symbols carved into metal support beams, symbols that weren't part of any blueprint. They were jagged, symmetrical, almost ceremonial, ancient geometry disguised as construction markings. Oh. At the end of the corridor, behind a rusted access panel, he found files. Not police reports, not government documents, older, much older, yellowed pages translated from clay tablets, illustrations copied from Roman libraries, fragments from Chinese bone scripts, and an entire section in forbidden Egyptian priest code. Characters so sacred they were erased from official records. Every culture described the same figure, a woman who walked between thresholds, a woman who appeared only where the grid was thin, a woman whose arrival meant that consciousness itself was being tested. They called her the listener of doors, the one who remembers, the returning, the pale vessel, the echo, the ninth shadow, the stranger of the twinned rooms, the whisper bride, the mother of corrections. Different names, same entity, and every description matched Aurelia perfectly. The stillness, the silence, the way time bent around her, the way witnesses felt like prey, watched by something far older than humanity. These records didn't describe her as a spirit, demon, or goddess. They described her as a calibration device, a being designed to measure human consciousness against something higher, something colder, something that has shaped history from the shadows. Think about that. Not a ghost, not an apparition, not a myth, a mechanism, an instrument, an observer, a living, conscious component of the grid itself. In the Egyptian fragments, she appears in ceremonial chambers used to attest the memories of initiates. Priests wrote that standing in her presence caused the mind to divide, one part anchored in reality, the other drifting into the hidden architecture beneath it. The strong returned enlightened, the weak returned wrong. The Romans feared her. They believed she predicted the fall of empires. Whenever she manifested at a threshold, usually in abandoned bathhouses or subterranean sanctuaries, senators panicked. They sent guardians, archivists, soldiers. Many who encountered her vanished. Those who survived claimed she unwrote parts of their minds. Chinese scholars saw her as a celestial auditor, an entity that appeared when the mandate of heaven was slipping, a sign that rulers had strayed too far from harmony and would soon be replaced. In every culture, Aurelia, whatever her true name once was, appeared when systems of control were failing. She was not a servant of the grid. She was a disruption, a correction signal, a purge command. Now you understand why the keepers followed her, not to protect her, to contain her, to silence her, to erase her from the minds of men. Because her presence meant one thing: the grid was becoming unstable. Oh. Carter, tracing every mention across continents, realized the truth with horrifying clarity. Room 19 wasn't built to hold her. It was built to monitor her, to predict her reappearances, to map her path across time. With each activation of Room 19 coincided with political upheavals, collapses, revolutions, disappearances of key figures, sudden shifts in global narratives, not random events, but recalibrations. Humanity thinks it writes its own history, but history follows patterns, cycles, controlled by forces that correct deviations whenever a civilization becomes too blind, too arrogant, too chaotic. Aurelia is the harbinger of those corrections. She does not kill. She does not harm. She reveals. And truth, raw, unfiltered truth, is the most dangerous force in existence. Carter's last recorded conversation with a surviving witness, a man institutionalized for decades, sheds light on what she truly is. The man whispered, barely coherent, "She shows you who you are without the lies." She removes the stories you built your life around. She strips the false self until only the raw core remains. Most men cannot survive seeing themselves. That is why so many went mad. Because the greatest fear is not the dark, not the unknown. The greatest fear is seeing yourself without illusion. Aurelia forces that confrontation. She forces the mind to face what it has hidden. She forces the soul to acknowledge the truth it has buried. And that truth, for most men, is unbearable. Carter, in his final lines, wrote something that chills even the most hardened men. She is not here to destroy us. She is here to see if we deserve to continue. Now ask yourself, why does Room 19 activate now? Why does she return now? What is happening in our world? Our institutions, our minds, that requires a correction. The descent continues, and the next revelation will strike deeper than all before it. She reached toward him and placed 2 fingers on his forehead. Carter screamed, but no sound came out. Visions exploded in his mind like cracks in glass. Ancient humans huddled in underground chambers, terrified of something in the sky. Priests drafting threshold symbols with trembling hands. Architects encoded sacred geometry into temples not as worship but as shields. Empires rising not by chance but by alignment. Rulers conversing with shadows that had no form. The grid forming not as a prison, but as a warning system. When it ended, Carter collapsed. Blood dripped from his nose. He gasped like a drowning man breaking the surface. Aurelia leaned closer. You were never meant to uncover the origin, only to obey its boundaries. And then the air behind him shifted. A low hum vibrated the floor. He turned and saw them. The keepers, the 3 shadows, fully formed. Human-shaped but hollow inside, like bodies made of compressed darkness. They radiated pressure, psychic weight so immense his vision blurred. Aurelia stepped back, not in fear, but in recognition of the system trying to correct itself. The tallest keeper whispered in a voice made of static, "He has seen too much." Carter staggered to his feet. His flashlight shattered from the vibration. He wasn't supposed to escape. He wasn't supposed to understand. But something in the visions changed him, ignited something ancient and defiant inside him. He shouted, trembling, "I saw the grid, and now I see you." Aurelia's eyes widened, the first true expression she'd ever shown, because those words were forbidden. The shadows rushed forward, and that was the last confirmed moment Carter was ever seen alive. But the story doesn't end there. You're not ready for the next truth. Carter didn't die in that moment. Death would have been mercy. What happened instead is far more disturbing and far more relevant to you, because Section 9 isn't about Carter's disappearance. It's about what remained after the keepers dragged him out of Room 19, what survived inside him. What awakened inside him, and why men like you are the ones who feel the echo of that awakening even now. When the keepers surged forward, reality didn't behave the way it should. Time didn't slow, it didn't freeze, it fractured. Three versions of Carter existed for a fraction of a second, one trying to run, one falling, one standing perfectly still. The threshold split his consciousness like a prism splitting light. The shadows grabbed him, not physically, but cognitively. They wrapped around his identity and extracted something like surgeons removing a tumor made of memory. But Aurelia intervened, not to save him, not out of compassion, but because something about Carter's reaction triggered a protocol older than civilization itself. She raised one hand. A gesture so subtle, so controlled, that the walls trembled as if obeying her. The hum of the keepers changed from predatory resonance to annoyed distortion. And for one brief moment they hesitated, not fearing her, but acknowledging her authority. With that hesitation, Carter fell through the threshold, not into the hall, not into the parking lot, not into the world as you know it. He fell sideways. Into a layer of consciousness meant only for initiates, a place the ancient texts called the mirror chamber. This chamber wasn't a physical room. It was a psychological crucible, the same place Egyptian priests confronted their shadow selves, where Roman initiates shed their false identities, where Chinese mystics dissolved their egos to perceive the internal empire. Carter landed on the threshold between who he was and who the grid needed him to become, and in that place Aurelia appeared again, not flickering, not fragmented, but solid, present, more real than the world he came from. She stood directly before him, eyes intense, expression unwavering. "Identity is the first construct," she said, her voice echoing through his skull. "The grid cannot control a man until it defines him." Carter trembled. "Why me?" "'Cause you looked," she replied. "Most men consume illusions. You dissected them." He struggled to breathe as if the chamber itself was compressing his chest. "Are you going to kill me?" Aurelia stepped closer, and the chamber reacted, light bending around her like gravity was shifting. "Death is irrelevant," she said. "Identity is the currency here." And then she showed him, not through visions, not through memory, but through direct transmission, the truth behind the grid. The grid wasn't designed by a single civilization. It wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't an institution. It was the collective survival mechanism of humanity's earliest minds. A psychic blueprint built in response to a threat so ancient, so catastrophic, that every culture buried it beneath myth, religion, and architecture. A threat not external, but internal. Human consciousness. Wild, unstable, fracturing under the weight of awareness itself. The first humans to awaken to self-awareness nearly went mad. They needed structure, beliefs, symbols, rituals, walls, gods, to hold the mind together. The grid became that structure. A scaffolding to prevent collapse, a boundary between sanity and the abyss. But over millennia, institutions hijacked the grid. Empires weaponized it, priests distorted it, kings rewrote it, governments modernized it, corporations digitized it. Now it surrounds you, not to protect you, but to shape you. And Room 19, it's one of the original calibration points. A relic of a time when the grid still corrected itself, when it still purged illusions, when truth wasn't a threat, but a necessity. Aurelia leaned close to Carter then, her voice turning sharper, darker. "You broke your identity when you spoke the forbidden phrase." She repeated his words, the ones he shouted before the keepers attacked. "I saw the grid, and now I see you." These words triggered a protocol, an ancient one. That shifted him from observer to initiate. The chamber brightened. Carter felt something inside him uncoil, a pressure he never knew was there. Aurelia whispered, "What survives this chamber becomes real." Then she vanished, not faded, not dissolved, vanished like a door slamming shut. The chamber collapsed. Carter fell back into Room 19, except he wasn't the same. He wasn't whole. His consciousness had been rewritten, refined, sharpened, stripped of illusions the grid imposed on ordinary men. When he stood, the keeper stepped back, for the first time on record. Because Carter was no longer prey. He had survived the threshold. His identity had stabilized into something the grid couldn't categorize. He wasn't supposed to exist. Not like that, and that's why he vanished. Not abducted. Not murdered. Not erased. Transformed. No one knows what he became, but the grid felt the shock. A ripple, a deviation. And that is why you feel something right now. a pressure behind your eyes, a tightening in your mind, a shift in your sense of self. Because listening to this story isn't entertainment, it's participation. The chamber tests every man who hears its echoes. And halfway through this descent, after everything you've heard, I need you to type this phrase in the comments twice to anchor your identity transformation. I see the shadow behind the door. I see the shadow behind the door. Say it, lock it in, anchor the shift. Listen carefully now, because what I'm about to tell you is the final descent. The last door, the quiet truth beneath all the noise, the final revelation that Motel Room 19 tried to bury beneath its peeling wallpaper and its stale, recycled air. You've followed me this far, deeper than most men would ever dare to go. And by now, you already feel it. The strange pull, the cold whisper, the invisible presence of the woman who waited in that room like a wound that never closed. But before we end, you need to understand why Room 19 existed in the first place. Because she wasn't the only thing hiding in that darkness. There was a reason that room swallowed people whole, a reason authorities sealed the documents, a reason the staff refused to speak even years later. It wasn't just tragedy, it wasn't just a mystery. It was design, deliberate, calculated, methodical. The truth is this: Room 19 was part of a psychological architecture, a hidden system, a forgotten experiment, a quiet monument to manipulation. That motel wasn't just a building. It was an observation post, a behavioral laboratory disguised as a roadside refuge, a place where people were watched without knowing they were watched, a place where minds were pushed, broken, reshaped. And the woman. She wasn't random. She was the first. The first to crack under the weight of the unseen. The first to understand what most never even question, that the world doesn't just control you through laws or governments or institutions. It controls you through silence, through the places you're not supposed to look, through the rooms you walk past without thinking, through the stories that never make it past the motel door. When she arrived at the motel, she wasn't running from someone. She wasn't hiding from her past. She was searching, following a trail, tracing the outline of something enormous, something ancient that she had discovered accidentally while studying the history of desert towns and abandoned surveillance sites. She stumbled into the wrong archive, opened the wrong drawer, translated the wrong memo, and suddenly she knew too much. Not enough to expose the whole thing, but enough to be noticed, enough to be hunted. By the time she reached Room 19, she knew she didn't have long. That's why she locked the door from the inside. That's why she tore out the pages of the motel's directory. That's why she scratched symbols into the walls. Symbols older than the motel, older than the town itself. Symbols tied to ancient knowledge, ancient watchers, ancient systems of control disguised as rituals, governments, and later, surveillance infrastructure. This wasn't a ghost story. Every person who heard her story, even a fragment of it, carried a piece of her with them. A spark, a seed, a question they could never fully answer. Why do certain stories refuse to die? Why do certain rooms never lose their shadows? Why do certain people vanish not into the world, but out of it?